So Beck, at the end of last year, I had talked here on InfoDump about my theme for this year, which is honoring my limitations.
Yeah.
And then I talked about at the start of the year how I was not doing a very good job with this. I was kind of really struggling and going through burnout and stuff like that. But I will say in the last month, things have changed and
Right.
things are a lot more positive. And I think the main thing that has happened is I've given myself permission to do things that humans typically don't need to give themselves permission for.
Oh no, I feel like I feel like this is a confessional. This is like a coach's confessional to another coach, because this is the antithesis, you guys, of any advice Doug would give to any other human being, right? You understand? Like he would never sit in a coaching session and be like, oh, and have left the giving permission to yourself to the end here, right? He would have done it first. So I'm glad we're getting there. Good.
So one of the things that I've done, and so this is a chance for other humans to maybe laugh at me, because I'm laughing at myself, is so I'm 44 years old now, and I've been supporting other autistic people for 23 years now. And until this last month, I did not give myself permission to have a lunch break throughout my day. I just,
Dark confessions from Doug right now.
I would just, if I remembered to eat or if I remember to grab something. But now it's been such a huge difference just doing that one thing. I can't begin to tell you, just having a lunch break.
Wow. I mean, listen, proud of you for getting there. But right, you guys, this is it, right? Doug works on himself probably as much as I do and as hard as we work on our clients, but all of us have our weak points, right? We all have something in some way that we kind of trap ourselves or capsize ourselves, right? And we hate admitting it. And there's Doug's. He just shared it with you guys really vulnerably, right? Here's a basic thing, one of your big 3 meals of the day, right? That's supposed to keep you going. And the number one coaching rule is self-care first, right? And all of these things. And yet you stepped right in it, Doug. And did it lead to burnout is the question? Not having a lunch break?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It was, I'm sure, a big contributor.
Yeah. I'm so glad that you have changed it. And I have to tell you, you look better. You look less tired. You look healthier and smilier and all of those things, right? Because my guess is now your body's feeling a little bit better too, right? Like you're probably sleeping better and all of those things. So nice catch, because that's good. That would have tanked you no matter what you were trying to take off your plate.
Yeah, saying that, I forgot to take a lunch break today, but other than that, I'm good.
Right, but you forget. See, here's the thing, but it's kindness to self, right? I'm going to walk through a coaching session now. It's kindness to self. You're allowed to make those mistakes occasionally, but correct it tomorrow, right? It is because it's a habit. And I think Americans learn that habit because we really do, or have up until recently, given so much value to the production, what people produce in the course of their day. Right. And that's how our value is justified. And I think, it's real easy to fall into that, especially as a business owner, right? To be like, oh, if I let it go for an hour and eat lunch, it's going to fall apart. Right. All of those things. But I'm so glad that you caught yourself on that. And I can't wait. There's probably so many other hidden ones too, when you start looking for them, right? All the little things that you, Well, that's awesome. Well, I'm excited to keep having a great conversation because I super love our guest that we're having today. He is somebody that I have joined him on his podcast quite a few times. And it's the first time that we're having him here on our podcast. And we have great conversations about exactly this kind of stuff. Philip always has me on to talk about the things that are important to our well-being, right? Our overall well-being. So I love joining him. So please welcome Philip to the show. I'm excited to hear what questions you have for him because I have not had a chance to get to know him in a very good way, in a personal way. So I'm thrilled to hear. So welcome, Philip.
Thank you. Thank you. It's great to be here. And I have to admit, I don't often get the opportunity to be on podcasts because I'm usually putting mine together, organizing my guests and getting things put together, recordings put together, and that sort of thing. But you know, I really love what I do. I think if you don't mind, I'll start with how my podcast actually came to be.
Sure. That'd be
Yeah,
great.
I mean, it's quite, for me, it's quite the interesting journey, if you will. It was in the middle of 2020 when COVID-19 had turned the world upside down on its head. And, you know, not only were people sick and being quarantined, but obviously, you know, nonprofits were like, how are we going to survive and things like that. So the Autism Society of Minnesota, I've been an independent contractor to the education. She was an educational specialist. Her job was eliminated because they had to do their cutbacks. And so I had to relocate my self-employment, and the Autism Society of Minnesota has kept me on as an educational specialist, but the advice that was given to me was that to find some other form of self-employment, because of course at that point in time the future was uncertain. And so what I did was, ever since I went through my classes for the Autism Society of Minnesota has classes for certification for direct care support for people with ASD. Ever since I took those classes, one of my hyperfixations has been autistic adults, because of a lot of the myths that still exist. Like there are no autistic adults, like, you know, you, I, and Doug, we don't actually exist, you know, that sort of thing. So, I mean, it really became a passion of mine. And so I was working with a counselor from the Minnesota Department of Vocational Rehabilitative Services. And so I was working with that person, and plus I brought on somebody who works to help people create small businesses, for example. And so what happened in that conversation was they said, okay, you have this passion, this desire, this hyper focus on autistic adults and information. How do we take that and turn it into something that can be really helpful, can really make a difference somewhere, and monetize it a bit, so you're making some money at it? And so we were sitting there, and the small business advisor said, well, there's blogging, there's you know, there's speaking engagements, there's podcasting, and so on and so forth. Well, I left that meeting, and the word podcast stayed with me. And I kept saying to myself, are you crazy? You know, you can't, you know. So what happened is that as we were getting into Labor Day 2020, and I started asking some people the question, I asked one person, I said, do you think that the autism community needs a podcast about autistic adults? And the response that came back was, hell yeah, that sort of thing. And then the person that I work with at Awesome, we call Autism Society of Minnesota, AUSM, Awesome. And then I asked my husband, Jason, and I said, podcast. And they said, well, you do have a decent radio voice. And I'm like, okay, that's news to me. You know, so that's kind of how the journey started. And in November of that year, I worked with a small business consultant who helped me put a business plan together. And from there, I worked with several people, and they helped me get a grant to start everything up. So everything that was started up is due to the grant that I got from Department of Rehabilitation Services. So I'm forever grateful to them. And then, of course, the Autism Society of Minnesota did some great things for me, because I mean, often in the past when I worked somewhere or done anything, they always look for the things that I can't do, but they saw things in me that I can do. And they said, let's, you know, they encouraged me on things like this. And so, you know, I always say that the Autism Society of Minnesota are my best autistic friends, and I really do mean that. But, you know, the one thing that I've been so amazed by is that when I started it, and especially when I started socializing on LinkedIn, I had people coming to me and saying, I want to contribute something to this. They saw something that could be theirs, and they came to me. And so I'm now in my third season, and even now, I mean, I've got some new people who come forward, say they want to be guests on the show, and that sort of thing. And I'm putting together my summer self-care series, which Becca has done a lot of shows. And let me tell you, the information that Becca shares on that show, you know, it's always a fantastic conversation, because we've emphasized that one person's self-care does not have to look like somebody else's. We know there's that diversity within the autistic community, and we exist. So, I mean, this podcast, I mean, I'm definitely not in it for the money. Believe me, I don't make a lot of money off of it. In fact, that would be nice, but it just doesn't happen that way. But I'm really not in it for that purpose. And yet a lot of the purposes that I set out to do, they're happening. You know, I mean, people are taking an interest in this. You know, it was so exciting it's so exciting to me that this podcast is not only heard in the US, it's being heard in Canada, it's being heard in the UK, it's being heard in Australia. This upcoming July, I am going to have Matthew, the hashtag actually autistic coach. And he's actually from France. And he's he's gonna be talking with me about important topics this upcoming year. And then I also get to say this. I have a huge surprise coming in October. I have a guest that is so important to the movement for neurodiversity. In October, Nick Walker, the author of Neuroqueer Heresies, is going to be a guest on my show in October to talk about neuroqueer, another coming out.
Yeah.
You know, because, you know, she's basically responsible for the neurodiversity paradigm. Yeah. So the fact that I can get people like her, like that, to be on my show, it's phenomenal. And Devin Price is going to be on in June. And he's going to be talking about what being successfully queer and autistic really means. Yeah. And he's also going to be coming back in the fall to talk about conflict resolution. So I mean, there's just so many great things that happen on this show. You know,
and Philip, it's not just your podcast, Today's Autistic Moment. You've also recently started the Autistic Podcasters Network. So can you tell people a little bit about that, and why did you decide to kind of reach out to people like Becca, myself, and many other autistic podcasters?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, as I was on LinkedIn, like I say, there's something about the autistic advocates on there. There's so many. Becca, you, Dr. Scott Farsard, whom I credit as my straight autistic twin brother. I mean, he might as well be. But things like that. I was just amazed to find out how many autistic people are doing podcasts. So I started to think, what if we could find a way to bring others together and support one another in whatever way? So we had that meeting on the 16th of March, which wasn't terribly well attended, but we just kind of came to the conclusion to start the Autistic Podcasters Network. It's just a small group right now on LinkedIn. And I think small groups are really a good idea, especially since a lot of us autistics, we may have issues with large groups of people. But, you know, it's a small group right now, and there's no website of any kind. There's nothing to it. But it's just a small group of people, and we can make it whatever we want, when and however we want. I'm hoping that we will get more autistic podcasters actually participating in it. You'll share your podcasts on there, you'll share your information and that sort of thing. And so, yeah, so I was part of creating that. There's a spin-off to my podcast that is really exciting. It's called Autistic Voices Roundtable Discussions. The idea was given to me by someone who I was saying, well, what else can I do with this thing? And they said, how about a roundtable discussion? I said, well, that's a great idea. And we know how autistics, we're often, our voices are silent, spoken over, and they don't really give a group of us the opportunity to talk and share our opinions and thoughts. So I decided that this was, my first one was in October 2021, that I would do one Autistic Voices Roundtable discussions, and I chose to do it on person first or identity first language. So I put the news out, and I got these 6 incredible people. In fact, this is how I met Dr. Scott Fassard and Rose Carrero, and many of the others on there. I mean, they came together to talk about why they insist on identity first language. I actually didn't have anybody who preferred the person first. I didn't even get them to come. So, I mean, that all started, and unlike my regular podcast that's audio only, these are actually video. They're shown live on YouTube, and they're recorded so people can go back to that. I've done roundtable discussions about identity language. I did one about Stop the Shock over that horrible decision that said that, shock therapy can actually be used. I did one about the dangers of medical myths, such as autism is caused by vaccines. And then there's the one that's been circulating only within the last several years, but there's one that suggests that women who take Tylenol or any kind of acetaminophen run the risk of giving birth to children with autism or ADHD. Total nonsense, left and right. And so I did a show. I did a Autistic Voices about that, and then I did one about busting the myth about empathy. Then this year, of course, with podcast, I'm focusing on the strengths and achievements of autistic adults. So, so there is going to be one in May, Autistic Voices Roundtable Discussions, how autistics define success. Because actually, Carol Jean Whittington was on my show in May, and she said the word successful. And so I came up with that. I said, well, I think we need to have a show about that. But the main purpose of my podcast and a lot of the things I'm doing is for autistics to get the information out there about us, to draw us together a little bit. But the self-advocacy part, the advocacy part is an important part of what I do. There are a lot of autistics who live in places that aren't as fortunate as we are here in Minnesota. We have the Autism Society of Minnesota. We have a governor who has just proclaimed April as Autism Acceptance Month. We have, ours is a safe state for transgender people and that sort of thing. And so, but there's a lot of places in the country where, someone gets diagnosed with autism, like you, myself, and Becca, and you go to somebody, say, I have autism, autism, and I need support. They'll say, well, we have a group home for you, but that's all they'll offer you, that sort of thing. So, I want autistics to have access to information without it only having to be from a limited source. And, in fact, one of the things my podcast has done is helped other autistics find the autistic community, because they don't really have one around them where they live, but they're finding it through today's autistic moment. And I just get so much joy out of that. So, yeah.
All right, Doug, what other good questions do you have for us on there? We've got a little bit more time before we have to get to the 11 questions.
Yeah. I guess, Philip, I wanted to learn beyond podcasting, what kind of brings you joy? Like, what are the things that you're passionate about?
Oh gosh, I have quite my own collection of things. Um, like I say, autism advocacy is a big thing that does bring me some joy. Um, my podcast is a big part of it, but I do enjoy advocating and helping autistics advocate. As for the things that I do when I'm out of spoons or I'm feeling like I need a rest, I do a lot of game playing on my phone and my iPad. I I am a Law and Order fan to like no other. The original and Criminal Intent, and I've recently been given some information that the one who played Detective Bob Gorin is most likely autistic. The thing is that on that show where he's the lead detective, he's able to find things that nobody else sees. For example, there was this one murder of an entire family, and he's in there investigating the murder scene, and he happens to notice the carpet on the floor. He keeps looking at the carpet and looking at the carpet, and he tells the CSU staff there to take pictures of the carpet. And maybe some of the rest of us are like, why is he interested in a carpet? That sort of thing. He's probably the only one who just happened to notice there are no other footprints on that carpet other than the staff that's there. So he goes into a small room, and he starts drawing lines on his board, and the captain of the squad says, "What are those lines?" He says, those are spots in the carpet made by a vacuum cleaner. He just happened to notice that the pervs vacuumed the rug before they left, to hide evidence. So I'm like, wow, who else notices something like that? And I enjoy finding things like that. And I have lots of things that I've enjoyed, but I think one of the things that I found a lot of joy in is learning about how autism affects my own life. When I was diagnosed in 2011, I was so isolated for a long time. And then when I found the Autism Society of Minnesota, I was like, wow, this is just a tremendous, tremendous thing. And, before we wrap up, we were talking beforehand. I had become very, very concerned about the recent wave of anti-trans bills that have been making their way across the country.
Yeah.
Actually, for example, Missouri has just established in the Attorney General's office a registry that people are supposed to snitch and say, I have a trans neighbor, and anybody who's assisted them, they're supposed to go into this thing where people have this radar for them, which is a horrible thing. But the trans bill that was passed in Georgia to prohibit gender affirming care, including reassignment, actually included a clause in there that said gender dysphoria is common among people, quote, with autism spectrum disorder. Eric Garcia, who's the writer of We're Not Broken, Changing the Autism Conversation, he will be back on my show in May to talk about unmasking your authentic autistic self. He has been, he's a political journalist, a very fine journalist. And, we've noted that these things do not just affect trans autistic people, they affect autistic people as a whole, because ultimately what they're saying is autistic people cannot make our own healthcare choices, basically.
What it is, it really becomes a question of autonomy, right? It's a
it absolutely does.
Mm-hmm.
And if you haven't heard my commentary on my latest show, I invite you to hear it. But the thing that I have been fearing this for a long time, that those who still believe that diverse sexual orientations and diverse gender identities are connecting them with being autistic. And what that tells me is that, unfortunately, I think we're going to see a lot more of this verbal violence that we're seeing. And so that's why I really feel it's important to get autistics to step up, because unless we start sharing our information and band together and do some advocacy together or individually, I'm afraid that things like this are going to continue to happen.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
and I should point out the ACLU has a tracker that can tell you in your state if there's anti-LGBTQ bills.
yeah,
They are they being introduced? Are they advancing? Those types of
yeah,
things. If you do want to find out what's going on in your state,
yeah,
you can go to the ACLU's website.
yeah. I mean, yeah. The one thing that must be said, actually, what they're saying is basically true. We have a lot of autistics who are trans. We have a lot of them who are non-binary. Tess Crombie, who happens to be somebody who's been on my show a few times, they are non-binary, and their work is tremendous. It really is. And my concern is always for including people like her. Sorry, them. Fix that later. Them, but my concern for them is that it impacts their life somehow. It impacts how they're viewed in the community. And there's a lot of bullying, there's a lot of hate crimes going on right now, and the thing is that a lot of that again gets impacted by this stuff. At the end of my commentary, like I say, my most recent episode, The New Normal, with David Gray Hammond, I basically said, and to all of you politicians out there who are spending all your money on all millions of dollars on wars and suing each other, it's past time you actually gave a damn about people and stop the excuses and bullying. It really is. Lastly, let me just give a little plug for David Gray Hammond. If you have not heard him, if you have not met him, you're missing something. David Gray Hammond lives in the south part of England, and he is 7 years in sobriety from drug and alcohol addiction. And for him, the autistic community saved his life. He credits the autistic community with helping him through addiction into recovery. I mean, here's the thing about him. His addiction was such that he was hyper focused on setting up his bottles every night to make sure they were set up in a row. And his drug and alcohol addiction was actually helping keep his sensory processing to a minimal, because they were basically numbing him. And when he went through recovery, he had to move that hyper focus from his drug use to the recovery piece, which also meant for him, he had to find new ways of dealing with when his sensory was driving him crazy, because he couldn't run for the bottle anymore. He couldn't run for the drugs anymore. And this is what I talk about, the incredible tenacity of autistic people. When he focused on that, I mean, he went after it. I mean, he was dedicated to his recovery. And wow, I've got 2 shows with him about autistic adults and substance abuse addiction, with a separate one about autistic adults, substance abuse recovery. Please go and listen to those, because you will find his story incredibly powerful. But his new books, The New Normal, Autistic Musings on the Thread of a Broken Society, you'll hear him say things such as, autistic people don't suffer from autism. We don't suffer from it. We suffer from the society that continues to oppress us because of autism. I'm so grateful and to have the opportunity to talk with these incredible people. So thank you.
Yeah.
Hey.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Are you ready for the 11 questions, Doug?
Yeah, absolutely. Philip, we always on each episode ask people 11 questions, just quick answers to get to know each guest a little bit better. So the first question is, what are your pronouns?
He, him, and his.
And what is your preferred stim?
Oh wow. Probably playing my games on my iPhone and iPad. I also like to squeeze a ball, or listen to music. I listen to a lot of music, and that kind of thing. I've actually collected some fidgets. This here's one of those lovely, rainbow knotters like that, that sort of thing. So another thing that I've done is, like, I sometimes will take my hand and trace something on a table. About a year ago, our cat had to be taken to the vet, and I was naturally very wound up. But when I got into the examination room, I found this little scratch on the table. It wasn't sharp anymore, it was just the mark. And I found, like, I could just trace that image, and it would be the right kind of thing to calm me down.
What is your favorite curse word, Philip?
Probably damn, or you son of a bitch, or something like that.
Who do you love, and what are you doing about it?
Oh, good question. My husband and I have been together. We met each other 14 years ago. And when I first received my diagnosis, the first thing that therapist wanted to do was meet with me and Jason at the time. We were still partners because marriage wasn't legal yet. He wanted to meet with both of us and help us understand my communication issues and the things that Jason might need to do to better understand me. And the thing is that this is where I consider myself incredibly blessed, because I know a lot of autistics that don't have this amazing relationship with somebody like this. But even though he's not autistic, he listens very closely to when I say something is disturbing me. I sometimes have to remind him, like, he's got his work table out in the living room right now, and sometimes he'll bounce his knee and that thing will shake and squeak. So I have to remind him not to do that. But I really love him. And like I said, we were legally married in 2013. And Jason and I were part of the fight for the Minnesota voters to vote no on a marriage amendment. And if I may say, I love the autistic community, the adult autistic community. I was just talking about this with David Gray Hammond on my show, but we both feel that the autistic community seems to be the one that embraces diversity better than most. There's a lot of communities, even the LGBT community, that really has issues with ableism and even racism. But the autistic community, the community of neurodivergence, we seem to accept one another and each other's diversity better than others. So there.
These next two questions, Phil, are going to be fill in the blank. You may be neurotypical if.
You find something you love and you hyper-focus on it to the point where you will do it no matter, you'll find time to do it no matter what. Even if you're burnt out, you'll do it. And the fact that, when you're neurodivergent, I've developed the following words. I call them neuro vibes. In the LGBT community, we have what we call gaydar, but I call them neuro vibes. When you're with somebody who is, you kind of sense that, I think. So
what's something you want to learn to do or be better at?
That's one of those things where, you know, as well as I do, that's an open-ended question. So it's not like I have an immediate answer for that. Every time it's different. So that's the best I can do.
Fair enough. What autistic social media account should people be paying attention to?
Well, we already said LinkedIn. Like I said, LinkedIn is definitely a place where autistics can find each other. You know, like I said, I think one of the things about the folks on LinkedIn, and you two can definitely, you know, speak to this too. There's something about that group of people. We're, you know, LinkedIn is the place where you find professionals, people who know that there's a professional. And one of the things that consistently amazes me is for all of the people who complain about us not having our boundaries, the autistic people on there know their boundaries, and they don't go on there to learn to hit on somebody or whatever. They go on there to communicate with each other because we found it safe to be on there. So LinkedIn, I mean, I have my own page on Facebook, Today's Autistic Woman, and I also have a community group page on Facebook for people to chat and that sort of thing. But there's a lot of spaces out there that are really working hard to provide community to autistic people.
And what's one thing in your routine you couldn't possibly live without?
Oh, that's like I say. Like I said, my games. My games actually are a source of my stimming. There's one of those that's, you know, connecting the wood blocks and that sort of thing. I tend to do that a lot. And you know, I have other groups of people that I may connect with, but they're more on a personal level. But you know, there.
Dog, cat, or must I choose?
Cats. Yeah, cat. Yeah. We've got our baby. His name is Diddy, Diddy. And we had cuddles up until 2019. I actually had her for ever since 2004. I had her. And so she died at the ripe old age of about 20. You know, we don't have children, we have cats, and our cat is our child, so sort of thing.
And the last question, Philip, what does autistic joy mean to you?
To me, autistic joy is knowing I'm autistic. And autistic joy has become letting myself, I guess what I want to say is, I don't know about you, but before I was diagnosed, a lot of the things that I did, I was hard on myself because I did them that way. Whether it was, you know, spending time binge watching Law and Order or something else or whatever, I used to be kind of hard on myself for that. But I think autistic joy comes from letting yourself be obsessed about something like that, because it's just something that, you know, it for me, the biggest sensory point with Law and Order is the deductive reasoning that goes into it. You know, how they go through this process of elimination of you know, going through their pieces of evidence and their conversations and everything that it leads to. I think the joy of being autistic is letting yourself have those interests and enjoying them probably like no other person can. Even if other people like why you're interested in that. So I think autistic joy comes from being happy with what's in front of you in the here and now, not necessarily in what's to come. but I think that would be my answer.
Is that it, Doug? Is that the last question?
That was it.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Philip. It's really been
Welcome.
great to have you here. And I'm really excited for folks to learn a little bit more about your podcast and catch up on episodes they may have missed. And yeah, thank you so much. We'll see you guys next time.
Thank you.